There's this thing that happens at tables sometimes where everything's working but nothing's clicking. You know what I mean? The mechanics are smooth, people are laughing at jokes, combat encounters are balanced, everyone's having what looks like a good time. You wrap up the session and people say thanks and pack up their dice and head out. And on paper, that's a success, right? That's what we're aiming for as GMs. Except here's what's bothering me. Nobody was thinking about the game between sessions. It was good, but just not good enough to be remembered. I kept waiting for that thing to happen where players get genuinely invested, where they start caring about their characters and each other's characters in a way that makes the story feel real, and it just wasn't happening. So I did what any GM does when something's not working. I tried to fix it with more prep, better villains, with more complex motivations, deeper lore about the world, more detailed NPCs with interesting backstories. I thought maybe if I just wrote better plots, if I just created more compelling content, then my players would start to care. Guess what? That wasn't it. It took me embarrassingly long to figure out that the problem wasn't what I was writing, it was how I was running the table. And once I understood that, it all started to change. Looking back now, I can see all the habits I'd developed that were keeping things shallow, but at the time they just felt like normal GMing stuff. I talked constantly, like way more than anyone else at the table. I'd describe every scene in detail, explain what NPCs were thinking, narrate outcomes, fill every single silence with more information, and I thought that's what good GMing looked like, you know? Keeping things moving. But what that actually meant was my players barely talked to each other. They'd say something to me, I'd respond, then would move to the next person. There was almost no inter-party conversations happening because I was always in the middle of every interaction. I also had this habit of explaining everything immediately. If something seemed unclear, I'll jump in to clarify before anyone else asks.
Stop interrupting me. The thing is,
If the party was debating what to do and seemed stuck for more than 30 seconds, I'd start dropping hints until the path forward was obvious. I was so worried about them feeling frustrated that I never let them sit with uncertainty or figure things out themselves. Then I moved scenes way too fast. The second conversation seemed like it might be wrapping up. I'd jump us to the next location. I thought dead air was the enemy, so I kept the pace up constantly. But what that meant was nothing had time to land. We were just moving through content. Here's the thing though, when you GM like that, players only really engage on their turn. They'd describe their action, roll their dice, wait for me to narrate the result, and then kind of zone out while I moved to the next person. Nobody was having opinions about what the party should do, nobody was arguing or debating in character. It all felt very procedural and safe. We were playing D&D, but we weren't really playing together. The shift for me wasn't learning some new technique, honestly, it came down to rethinking what my job was as a GM. I stopped planning how scenes were supposed to end, I stopped trying to engineer specific emotional beats or guide characters towards particular resolutions. Instead of here's what happens and here's where we're going, I started building situations and then just waiting to see what my players did with them. That sounds like a small change, right? It was, but the change was astronomical, because that meant I wasn't performing a story at my players anymore. I was watching them create it, and I was just as curious about where it would go as they were. The key question became, here's the mess, what do you do? Instead of, here's the story beat, we're moving through. And then I'd actually shut up and let them figure out without trying to steer them. Another thing that took me way too long to understand is that backstory doesn't tell you who a character is. I used to think character was something players brought to the table already formed. If I wanted to know who someone's character was, I'd look at what they wrote in their background, but that's not where the character actually lives. That's just a sketch, the idea of who the person might be. You really learn who a character is when things go wrong, when their plan falls apart and when someone gets hurt, or when they have to choose between two things they care about. Do they tell the truth even when lying would be easier? Do they run when things get dangerous or stand their ground? Do they take responsibility when something goes wrong or blame someone else? Those moments are where the character actually happens, and my job isn't to engineer a specific outcome or protect them from making the wrong choice. It's to present the situation, shut the hell up, and watch what they do. That was really hard for me at first. I wanted to protect my players from consequences. If they were about to make a choice that would blow up in their faces, my instinct was to warn them, or give them more information, or create an escape hatch. But doing that robs them of the moment, you know? It turns what could have been a defining character choice into just another piece of content they move through safely. I also realized I've been thinking about characters in terms of their mechanical function instead of actual people. Tank, healer, face, damage dealer. I'd notice who was good at what mechanically, and then start thinking of them that way. The paladin's job is to keep enemies busy. The bard handles the negotiations. The rogue scouts ahead. That kind of thinking killed roleplay because it reduced everyone to their utility. What I started paying attention to instead was behavior patterns. Who hesitates before making decisions? Who always volunteers to go first into danger? That's the real character. That's what makes someone feel like an actual person instead of a collection of abilities and spell slots. And once I started noticing these patterns, I could build situations that would highlight them or challenge them or put them in conflict with each other in interesting ways. Oh man, this one still makes me mad when I see it at tables. Players write these flaws on their character sheet that sounds like flaws but aren't really. My character is sarcastic. Okay, cool. But does the sarcasm ever actually cause problems? My character is socially awkward. Great, but does the awkwardness ever ruin an important negotiation or make an NPC refuse to work with them? My character has a dark past and doesn't trust easily. But do they trust the party immediately anyway because that's mechanically easier? If the answer is no, if the flaw never costs them anything, then it's not actually a flaw. Real flaws mess things up. They hurt people's feelings and ruin carefully laid plans. They create genuine problems the party has to navigate together. The character who can't resist stealing even when it's obviously a terrible idea, and their kleptomania gets them thrown in jail or breaks a truce the party spent 3 sessions building. That's a real flaw. The character who's so convinced they're always right and they won't listen to anyone, and that stubbornness leads to disaster. That's a real flaw. Anyway, there was this moment a while ago where I knew something had fundamentally shifted. One of my players had their character immediately touch this obviously cursed artifact despite multiple party members yelling at them not to. And the reaction from the rest of the table wasn't frustration or surprise. Everyone just laughed and went, of course he touched it. What did we expect? Because that's what the character does. He's curious to a fault. He can't help himself. Everyone knows this about him by now. And that's not boring, that's character. That's someone who exists consistently enough that other people can predict their behavior. It only happened because I'd been actively noticing and remembering patterns. When a character does something that fits with their established behavior, I'll mention it. Not in a heavy-handed way, just acknowledging it. That's the 3rd time you've volunteered to take the dangerous job, or I'll have an NPC notice it. You know, every time we've talked, you've deflected when I ask about your past. Makes me curious what you're hiding. Rewarding consistency doesn't mean punishing growth, by the way. Characters can and should change over time, but that growth only means something when there's a consistent baseline to grow from, you know? When a character does something that goes against their established pattern, that's when you really spotlight it and let it be a moment. Now I can tell you the exact session where I knew this approach was working. It wasn't because of anything particularly dramatic I did as the GM. It was because of how my players were interacting with each other. They were actually waiting for each other to finish speaking instead of jumping in with their own actions. They were checking in with each other. Hey, what does your character think about this? Or how are you feeling after what just happened? They were having arguments in character about what the right thing to do was, and these debates would last 10 or 15 minutes without me needing to referee or jump in at all. They were defending each other's choices to NPCs, calling back to jokes from sessions that happened months ago, like they were shared memories that mattered. That's when I knew they cared about their characters, about each other's characters, and about the story we were building together. And I didn't make that happen by writing better plots or creating more compelling villains. I made it happen by getting out of the way and letting them actually play. After that, my behind the screen notes looked pretty different than they used to. I mean, yeah, I still track HP and conditions and initiative and all that mechanical stuff, but the notes I reference most during actual play aren't about mechanics. They're about what each character is afraid of, what topics they avoid, what they want but haven't admitted out loud, what they lie about and to whom. And I use that information to design situations that will create interesting choices for them, not in a gotcha way, not to punish them, but to create opportunities for depth. The character who's terrified of failure gets put in a position where they have to delegate something important to someone else, and the character who never talks about their family runs into someone who knew them before. The character who desperately wants recognition gets offered exactly that, but at a cost they might not be willing to pay. I also watch for moments when the characters break their own patterns in interesting ways and make sure to spotlight those. Those are the moments that matter, and I make sure the other characters notice and let it land, and I don't rush past it. Now you might be asking, so which conflict actually works? Okay, so I'll just say it. I hate PvP. I hate secret betrayal arcs where one character is working against the party without the other players knowing. That kind of conflict almost always makes the table feel worse and damages the trust players need to roleplay vulnerably with each other. But moral arguments, characters disagreeing about the right thing to do when both sides have legitimate points, that stuff creates some of the best moments at my table. Loyalty loyalty versus honesty, mercy versus justice, personal safety versus helping strangers, the needs of one versus the needs of many. Those conflicts reveal what characters actually value at their core, and working through them actually strengthens the party's bonds instead of breaking them. Because after a fight like that, even if they don't fully agree, they understand each other better. They've seen each other compromise or stand firm or change their mind. The relationship feels real. That being said, I need to say that this isn't some grand philosophy that requires rebuilding your entire approach to GMing. A lot of it comes down to small practical habits. First, I pull two players aside for scenes sometimes, not to split the party in a dungeon or anything, but to create space for characters to have conversations without the whole table listening. Some of the best character moments happen in those side conversations because players feel less self-conscious. Second, I let NPCs ask uncomfortable questions, not hostile or direct, like, why do you care so much about what people think of you? Players will often dodge questions like that when they come from other PCs because they don't want to steal spotlight, but they'll engage when it's an NPC because that feels like part of the scene. Third, I sit in silence way longer than I used to. When I ask, what do you do? And nobody answers immediately, I don't feel that space anymore. I just wait. That silence creates room for them to step in instead of me controlling every transition. Fourth thing, and it has a lot to do with the thing I just said, I don't rush to the next fight. Combat is fun and important, but if players want to spend 20 minutes in character processing what just happened, or debate what to do next, that's the game. I let it be. And last, I let plans fail. Failure creates more interesting situations than success most of the time. If everything always works smoothly, there's no texture to the experience. The key to all this is that I stop saving them. That's where all the good stuff lives. So guys, here's the truth. My players were never the problem. I was. The moment everything changed was when I stopped trying to perform as a GM. I quit forcing plot twists and steering emotions and carrying the pressure of making every session great. I stopped controlling and started paying attention. I watched what made the players interested, I let the moments breathe, and I gave them space to play. And that was it. No better prep or anything like that, just trust. And honestly, GMing is way more fun this way. Turns out collaboration beats control every time. Who would have thought? So have you experienced similar problems? Or are you a player that's GM is doing these sorts of things? If so, write it in the comments. Let us know what's happening. Maybe someone else can give you some advice and help. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay spicy adventurers.